Thank you. I'm here with Dr. Mel Unger, who is, I think, the past conductor of Decameron with the longest tenure. So we were just chatting a little bit about that, and maybe we can start with that, actually. Tell us a little bit about the span of time that you were with Decameron.
Well, I started in 81. I moved to Edmonton in 1980, and they were looking, so I auditioned and started in 81. The following, I was teaching at the Baptist College, which was then called North American Baptist College. So I took a year leave the following year to finish my doctoral residency at the University of Illinois, and then I came back. So I did 1 year. At that time, Mark Surrett was the accompanist, and I'm pretty sure he filled in the following year while I was gone, and then I came back. And I don't remember if I took any sabbatical leaves where I was gone from Decameron. I know I took a sabbatical, but I think I was writing, and so I stayed in Edmonton and continued with Decameron during that year.
Okay, great. Yeah, when I first saw this program, I have this concert program from the 50th anniversary that lists all the different conductors, and I saw Mark Surrett's name when I first looked at it, and I thought, well, what do you know? Because of course he's in Ontario.
Right.
And the first year that I sang in Ontario Youth Choir, this is many years ago, he was the conductor.
Oh,
So it's a small world.
indeed.
So can you tell me a bit about the artistic and choral scene in Edmonton when you started out and during that time?
It really was the beginning. I think of it as the beginning of a choral spurt or a growth period. Choral was just beginning. That first year, Michelle Gervais was basically setting it up, recruiting singers. So I think they began then in the 82, 80, 81. No, in the 81, I think that season as well. Anyway,
yeah, that's a good memory. I recall they celebrated their 40th anniversary last year. So
yeah.
I think you're exactly right.
So, and Len Rasov he came to the university, I think, in 81. So it really began a period of expanded choral activity. And when I came, I thought of Winnipeg as more of a choral city than Edmonton, but I think that changed pretty quickly.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, that's really cool. I have thought of Edmonton for a long time as sort of a choral beacon in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much great stuff going on here, and it has been that way for a long time. I love hearing stories of it. It feels a little bit like when it began, was that period of time in the 80s. There was so much happening, and also Violet Archer was here, and Malcolm Forsyth was here, and just so many amazing people in one spot.
Yeah, I hesitate a little bit to say that because, by implication, it maybe I don't mean to disparage what had gone before, right?
Yeah, of course.
Other people, but the increased activity, certainly pro choral, I think, gave everybody sort of a kick in the pants.
Yeah.
To up their game, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Let's hear a little bit about you. Can you talk about your development as a choral artist? And I'm curious to know if there's a moment in your mind where you heard a piece of music or heard a concert and you had that aha moment where you thought, this is what I have to do. I know that I'm going to go into this field.
I remember in third grade, our little class, country school, was doing a Christmas program, and maybe my voice was, I've never considered myself a great singer, but perhaps I was a bit of a leader as a singer. So I remember the teacher putting me in front of the class, and I distinctly remember being disappointed that I had to face forward instead of facing the group, because I think already at that time I was intrigued by this idea of leading a choir. An important moment, I think, happened at a choral festival in the town where I grew up, which is Coaldale, Alberta, where they concluded, I think it was they concluded with a Hallelujah chorus. I'd never heard it. It was just with piano, but I was absolutely amazed. And then when I was in junior high, we had a teacher who was, she was actually hired, I think, as an economics teacher, but she also did the choral classes. And she really inspired us. So by that time, definitely I wanted to be choral conductor.
Yeah, it's amazing that you can trace it all the way back to grade 3. That's
Yeah.
pretty cool. And when did you fall in love specifically with Bach? I mean, Bach is my favorite composer, so I want to hear about this.
Well, if I'm honest, I have to say that through my undergraduate years, I went to the University of Saskatchewan because they had a bachelor music program and with a teacher's credential. And my father insisted that I go to a place where I could get a job later. So he didn't want me to go to U of A because they just had a bachelor of music and and I didn't want a bachelor of education. So anyway, I, I thought of Bach just as sort of a bunch of sewing machines all going at the same time. And it wasn't until I was in Germany at the conservatory that I saw what could be done in terms of text music analysis and interpretation of the works from that point of the point of analysis, understanding the musical structure, but also understanding the text and understanding the historical background. And that's when I really became intrigued. I think maybe the performances were also a little more transparent, even though Rilling wasn't known as, a leader in the historically performed in performances, the informed performances. But nevertheless, Harnoncourt was making his impact and so on. Performances of Counterpoint were becoming more transparent, and I think that helped too. So after that, I was hooked.
Yeah. And do you have an ensemble that, like a go-to ensemble when you think, okay, this choir, I love the way that they perform Bach?
Right now, I think it's got to be Rudolf Lutz out of Switzerland.
Okay.
Those online recordings are just amazing. Awesome. And his lecture demonstrations, I think, are just amazing too. Of course, Suzuki's great. I appreciate Rilling still, but the clarity of some of these other conductors, I think, is really quite striking.
Cool. Yeah. Okay. So let's go back to your time with the camera. Do you have some favorite stories, most vivid memories, either musical or otherwise, that you can tell us about?
To be honest, when I started, I really was struggling with recruiting singers because I wasn't at the university. I think that was a bit of a handicap. And so I spent a lot of time on the phone trying to recruit singers. With added decades of experience, I could have maybe done it differently or better, or, worked with singers that I thought weren't suitable at the time, so on. But the highlight probably came for me when we were chosen to be the choir in residence at I think it's still called the Classical Seminar Festival in Eisenstadt, which is about 30 miles outside of Vienna. That's where Haydn worked. And they, at that time, it was led by Don Moses, who was at that time at the University of Iowa. And so we applied, and there were 3 choirs chosen, but we were chosen as the choir in residence, which gave us some special opportunities. One of them was to perform at St. Stephen's Cathedral in Vienna. So we performed there on a Saturday. It was a little scary, quite honestly, because it didn't work out for us to bring an organist with us. We performed the Vier Mass with organ. And so we had to go a week ahead of time, meet with one of their assistant organists, practice. He was nervous because he thought he brought his wife along so that she could translate English to German. He was very relieved that I spoke at least some German. And then a week later, we went back and we performed it in a rather important service. I think it was the Assumption of Mary, and the Cardinal Archbishop was officiating. So the cathedral was basically full. I think it seats a couple of thousand. So that was really quite special. In Eisenstadt, the 3 choirs were asked to jointly present a concert. And they have a rule there that every concert has to have at least some Haydn. Well, we had programmed in our little segment, we had programmed Canadian works, but we had to do some Haydn. So we did some Haydn part songs just to fulfill the requirement. And then probably the highlight of that concert was performing the Ramage Ave Vero Quartus, which I think is one of the greatest Canadian compositions ever. And not so easy to do, frankly. It's anybody who's done that knows some of the pitfalls in that piece. But I think we really peaked at that performance. So that for me was a highlight for sure.
Great, amazing. I love picturing that concert in St. Stephen's Cathedral. I was there when I was 16 and singing in there with a choir, and couldn't believe just the massiveness of the space.
I know.
And you really get a sense of what the music's supposed to sound like, you know, why the composers wrote these chords this way when they, you know, they had that sound in their mind that it's all going to collect together in this incredible color that can't really be achieved here.
Yeah, unless you're in a cistern.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe that's the solution. You mentioned the Vierne Mass, which takes me to my next question. There's this amazing Decamera recording, the Gloria CD that you recorded in '95, and that Mass is on there, I think.
Right.
It's an amazing recording. I absolutely love it. Do you have some stories about that album, why you chose that repertoire, and what the process was like?
As I recall, you know, I was always trying to think of repertoire that we could do with, let's say, a brass quintet or with organ. We didn't really have the money to do much with orchestra, often to hire players. And so I was talking to Mark Surratt, actually, and he recommended that piece. And so it's originally written for 2 organs, but there is that addition with 1 organ. So we had, I believe we had done 4 movements without credo before we went to Austria. I can't remember exactly how I juggled, you know, preparing the works for Austria and then, you know, not performing them double at home or something like that, because you have to schedule recording sessions. But I know that we had learned it obviously before we went to Austria. And I think we recorded it just before we went to Austria. The Poulenc Gloria, we did, I think, 2 years later. And I know it's orchestrated, but honestly, I quite like the version with piano. And Loretta Dueck was really at the top of her game. She and Janet Smith, who was singing the solos. Janet had done the Gloria with Elmer Eisler in Toronto, I think, when I want to say it was Princess Margaret was in town. It was a big performance. So, I mean, her credentials with that piece were really quite amazing. So to have her in the soprano section and have her be able to do those solos was really a highlight. So then we put the 2 together for the recording, and Bruce Wheatcroft, I'm pretty sure it's Bruce Wheatcroft at the organ. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to come to Vienna with us. So that's why we had that, had to rearrange things with one of the organists at St. Stephen's.
Yeah. Oh, it's a great recording. Really, really stunning. Okay, so tell us a bit about your musical journey since leaving Decamera and what you're doing now and with choral art and otherwise musically.
Well, after I was in Germany with Rilling, I'd been so impressed with his interpretations. There was at that time a kind of, well, conflict is maybe too strong a word, but difference of opinion between sort of the Harnoncourt group, which was very concerned with reproducing the exact sound, and then Rilling, who acknowledged all of that study, but performed with modern instruments. And I felt that he often was able to get at a sort of deeper level of intent for the piece, other than just recreating the sonic dimensions of the piece. So what struck me was that these texts in the Bach cantatas, because Rilling was in that recording project where he was recording all of the Bach sacred cantatas, And I felt as if people didn't understand sort of the dramatic dimensions of these works. There was criticism of the poetry, that it wasn't great poetry in the cantata librettos, that it was moralistic and so on and so forth. But I recognized that there's a lot of recycled biblical material, that it functioned in the liturgy as rather preachy music, and that Bach then took that purpose to create what is a rather dramatic work that really expresses various ideas, not just text painting in the music, but other ideas, where he uses canon and does textless chorales in an obligato instrument. So anyway, I decided to come up with this plan of doing a sort of a literal word-by-word translation of the librettos, and then provide some guide as to how these texts were recycled biblical material, so that people could understand what was going on in the mind of the librettist, and then also in Bach's mind. So I was able to find a publisher who was willing to give me a contract on the basis of one cantata that I had done. I hadn't finished the manuscript by any means. I worked on that from 88 to 96. When that book was published, suddenly I was a Bach scholar. I really wasn't a Bach scholar. I knew about the text. I really thought of it as the first step. The second step should be analyses of the music using that material, which I'm kind of working on now. But anyway, because of that, the influence of that book, I was able to get a job at Baldwin Wallace College in Berea, Ohio, which is where we've retired now, and at the Bach Institute, the Riemer Schneider Bach Institute. I almost didn't apply for that job, but it came up, and I just thought, well, what if I apply for it? It was scary, honestly, because I thought it might mean I would never conduct again, and that was my first love. But as it turned out, I still continued to conduct while at Baldwin Wallace, both in Cleveland as well as at the college. So that's how I came to be there. And I was there till 2015, when I went to State University of New York in Fredonia to become the director of the school, rather large school of music there. Just at the end of my career, I wanted to just help other faculty and musicians achieve the best that they could, given all of the restrictions of budgets nowadays and all of that. So, I mean, higher ed is really struggling everywhere, I think. So it was a somewhat unusual path. I remember in one position early in my career where I was asked, would you consider administration? I said, oh, no. So my career path actually surprised me as well as maybe others.
Yeah. And did your worst fear come true? Did you keep conducting?
I did. I was at Baldwin Wallace. It was the first semester. I did not conduct, but then one day I was passing the director, Katie Judgisian, the director of the conservatory, and she said, do you know a conductor she wanted to establish a sort of town and gown choir, one that would be open to, that would encourage non-music majors to join and so on. She was trying to break down some of the barriers between the conservatory, which was seen as a bit standoffish and elitist, and the rest of the college. And so I said, well, I think I might be interested. So at that point, we formed what I called the BW Singers, and it's called that to this day. And then the following year, the Singers Club of Cleveland was looking for a conductor. That was an interesting group. It's a male chorus that was founded in the late 1800s, part of the Lieder Tafel movement, where choral societies in Europe, often men's groups, but later also mixed groups. Well, even some of the earlier ones, I guess, were mixed groups. The group that in 1829 did the performance of St. Matthew Passion and revived Bach and so on and so forth. So that they had started in Cleveland actually before the Cleveland Orchestra. So it's the
Oh,
oldest
wow.
art organization in Cleveland. And when I say it was an interesting experience, it's because that group to this day, I think it's fair to say, is as much of a social group as it is an artistic group, which creates some interesting dynamics. They, for example, had at that time, whether they do still or not, I don't know, but they had a music committee. So repertoire was chosen in conjunction with this committee, which, I didn't know how that would work. I was used to being able to choose my own repertoire. But, I worked within those parameters. And it was fulfilling in its own way. Sometimes I think we didn't quite get the standard of performance that we might have liked, but we had a good time and did some interesting things. I incorporated some unusual groups, everything from German Schuhplatten dancers to Irish dancers to liturgical dancers to Alp horn or steel drum band, and we just mixed it up, and it was interesting.
Yeah, that's really neat. Very cool. How do you think choral music or choral art has changed since you were directing that camera?
The one thing that I certainly noticed is the more diverse repertoire. I think there's much more non-Western music, and I think that's great. Maybe it's just because of my connections, our son Tim's connections with what I think of as the youth choral movement. He sang with Scott Leithed in Edmonton, and he's continued to work with some of that repertoire. I think, for example, of a piece like Carl Jenkins' Adiemus. It was first a commercial for Delta Airlines, and after that it became so popular, and they did these Adiemus albums, and his career really changed after that. He began composing, works with orchestra, and so on. That sort of piece that appeals to a mass audience, that's great for youth choir. And in Canada, you've got all these different groups, Prairie Voices, and so on. So I think that's had an impact too, where the lines between sort of the high art and more accessible music, music maybe from South Africa that's maybe a little more repetitive, but it's just appealing. And so I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. So from there, what are you doing now musically?
Well, I had announced my retirement just before at the University of SUNY, Fredonia, just before the pandemic. So my last months were, I was the only essential worker going in. It's a fairly large school in music. At that time, we had about 600 music majors, not counting music theater or music industry students. So suddenly the halls were empty. I was the only essential worker, and so on. So retirement ended sort of with a whimper, not a bang, or I should say, retirement began with that. I always like projects. So one of the books that I published is a historical dictionary of choral music, which was pretty overwhelming because it's a question of what not to put in or what to leave out, right? And how to consolidate stuff and what's important and what don't I know and what am I not aware of and so on. But anyway, the publisher had said right from the outset, that was 2010, that they wanted a second edition. I thought, oh, great, that's a money grab, right? I shouldn't say that, but anyway, so now they've asked that I do a second edition with 30% new material. So I'm working on that. The contract's due at the end of this year, and I'm working hard every day to get that done. I'm also working on what I referred to before, which is to do analyses of Bach cantatas that look at what sort of musical ideas are generated out of the libretto. So I'm very interested in text-music relations, and it seemed to me that the best way to do that was to actually annotate scores. When I taught Bach seminars, I would have my notes on one side and the score on the other, and you're constantly going back and forth. And I thought, what if this was right on the music? So I'm using piano vocal scores in part because they're public domain and they're also more easily, put on the piano and played. And it's a sort of project that doesn't really fit into the publishing categories that the publishers have. So I've decided that just to mount them on my website. So melvinunger.com. So people can have them for free. I check every morning to see who's been, not who, but how many people have been looking at it. And usually it's really interesting that people from around the world are finding them. And I hope they're useful, because I think this is what intrigued me when I was a student in Germany. And I've done the literary part of it, and I think now the musical part of it needs to be done. So I estimate that will take another 4 years perhaps to get that all done. I've done about 50.
Wow. Wow.
So those are the two big projects.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting that it's not really something publishers want to pick up, because my feeling is that would be a fascinating book to have in your library and be able to reference, and, you know, such a rewarding resource to have. But
I haven't contacted a lot of publishers, just a few, and that was the response. And it doesn't really fit into like, it's not music. Well, it is sort of an addition, but it's not really an addition, because we're just using the Bach Gesellschaft edition and then pasting comments on top of it.
mm-hmm.
And it's not a book. So
sounds like an opportunity to create a new category.
Some publishing, yeah. Publishing is also at this point really facing financial challenges. I was asked to do the overview article on the Bach cantatas, for Bach sacred cantatas, for what was going to be the Cambridge Bach Encyclopedia. But ultimately, and then we had signed contract and everything, and then ultimately they decided that it wasn't financially viable, and they pulled back. And so the rights to that came back to me, and I decided I'll just put it on my website, and anybody can see it and use it.
Yeah.
And so it'll be available that way. But I think publishers have to think long and hard about what is going to pay, recoup their investment.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, it's great that it's on your website. I am anticipating lots of hours spent there this coming summer, checking out that resource. So I think those were all the kind of questions that I had listed out, but I wanted to ask you also if there were any final comments or ideas that you wanted to include that we didn't talk about yet.
I would just say that even though my career went in directions a little different from what I'd at first thought or hoped for, I still feel very providentially blessed. There's so many musicians out there who are, I would call them underemployed. They may have great credentials, but just finding that position. I mean, the whole adjunct professor market is slave labor. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. They're just so underemployed, and they're trying to follow their passion. I remember Loretta Duick once saying to me, she said, I think musicians have to do, I hope I'm quoting her correctly, something like, I think musicians have to do jobs they don't like to do the job, the music that they do like. So a lot of people are doing, work that maybe isn't so enjoyable. And I've been able to be full-time in the music business my whole career. And so, especially when I was an administrator for 5 years, I hope that I was able to, really nurture and promote. Some of my colleagues at SUNY Fredonia were just, they were so much smarter and more talented than I. It was unbelievable. I think of one, well, I could go on and on, but the one who, when he was applying for tenure, one of the letters was from Taruskin, that famous musicologist, who said he was one of his best students. I'm thinking, well, if we can't give full professorship to someone like that, and there were just so many of them, and I just hope that I was able to contribute a little to them being able to really shine in what they were so good at.
Love that. Yeah, that's great. Bonus question. What is the recording that you're really interested in listening to right now?
I don't know that there's one, but you know, as I go through some of these names that I'm adding to the historical dictionary, and I think, well, okay, I don't really know this composer. I wonder what's on YouTube. You know, you can read descriptions of their music, but then to listen to it. Recently, I found a YouTube clip. I don't even remember the recording, but it was Voices 8, and the clarity of the ensemble, the intonation, it's just stunning. It's just amazing. So I find these gems. I also find composers that I think, I've never heard of him. He sounds just as good as Mozart, you know, whatever. And so those are always intriguing finds. With Bach, I again and again come back to Rudolf Lutz in Switzerland.
Yeah, great. Great. Well, thank you very much for your time today. It's great to talk to you and hear these stories of your time with Decamera, and looking forward to sharing this interview with the world as we head toward our 60th anniversary. And yeah, thank you again. It's great to finally meet you and to have this chance to talk together.
Well, thank you, and I'm actually looking forward to exploring some of your many publications.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, great. All right. Thanks again.